We've reached the 26th and final part of our educational series on the teachings of the Catholic Church that began 3 years and 5 months ago in January of 2023. 7 months ago. The topic for the next month or so is going to be titled Catholic Social Teaching. And this topic is a collection of the contributions that the Church has made in the realm of politics, society, and international relations. Now, hearing the word politics might cause a few eyes to roll, and I'm usually one of the people rolling their eyes. But in this context, we're not talking about political parties or right-wing versus left-wing. The classical understanding of politics is the philosophy of ordering society. Anytime you have people coming together, we have to organize them according to human nature and according to justice. And the Catholic Church has developed a number of concepts and principles regarding social teaching over the last couple of centuries, and these principles will be the topic of the series of homilies that we're starting now. Now, our first reaction might be the Church needs to stay out of politics. It should just be about religion and God. Why are we diving into these sort of earthly topics? However, the Church isn't just about religion. It isn't even just about God, because the Church is made up of people, and people interact with each other on local and national and global scales. And so Catholic social teaching aims to describe the ideal right ordering of society because the Church cares about people. Catholic social teaching is there to inform and to educate us on political candidates, on voting. It is aimed at teaching us how to care for the poor, how to care for our communities and the environment. It is there to help us organize society after the heart of Christ. Catholic social teaching is centered around 7 major principles, and these principles are ordered from the most fundamental, the most basic, to the more nuanced, which we'll be talking about later on. So today we are going to be taking a look at the first of these principles. The first and most fundamental principle of Catholic social teaching is the life and dignity of the human person. The Catholic Church proclaims that human life is sacred and that the dignity of the human person is the foundation of society. This belief is the foundation of all the other principles that I'm going to be talking about for the next month or so. This means that abortion and euthanasia and cloning and embryonic stem cell research, the use of the death penalty, waging war, all of these things are topics of Catholic social teaching. We believe that every person is precious. We believe that people are more important than things or than money. And we believe that the measure of every institution is whether or not it threatens or enhances the life and dignity of the human person. In his final letter, Pope Francis wrote, "The world exists for everyone because all of us were born with the same dignity. Differences of color, religion, talent, place of birth or residence, and so many others cannot be used to justify the privileges of some over the rights of all. As a community, we have an obligation to ensure that every person lives with dignity and has sufficient opportunities for his or her development." Now, the rest of the world doesn't see politics as that. They see politics as keeping score or winning or defeating a political opponent from another party or perhaps another nation. But the Church sees us all as children of God, whether we all recognize that or not, whether we care about that or not. The specialness of every single human being isn't something that we've imagined or that we have invented. It is inherent. It is intrinsic. You have a worth that is superior to any other material object. And because of that, you deserve to be treated differently than any other material object. Catholic social teaching requires us that we are treated differently than anything else in existence. And because of this, as Catholics, we take issues of human life very seriously. Pope Francis said, "Our defense of the innocent unborn, for example, needs to be clear, firm, and passionate. For at stake is the dignity of a human life, which is always sacred and demands love for each person, regardless of his or her stage of development." And that's why it can at times seem like, the church encourages people to be a one-issue voter when it comes to abortion. People accuse the Catholic Church of focusing on only the issue of abortion when it comes to elections. But the Catholic voter is not a one-issue voter. It's just that the sacredness of human life is the most fundamental issue in a long list of issues that we vote on. It's the first check mark for or against somebody that we can vote for. There's many more issues to follow. For example, Pope Francis continues, "Equally sacred, however, are the lives of the poor, those already born, the destitute, the abandoned, and the underprivileged, the vulnerable, the infirm, the elderly exposed to covert euthanasia, the victims of human trafficking, new forms of slavery, and every form of rejection." In other words, the lives of the unborn are equal to the lives of those suffering in the world. So if we stop at the issue of abortion when we vote, then we're ignoring some other important topics. How will the poor be treated? The elderly, the sick, refugees. Why is it that we say it's probably their own fault when a homeless person dies of exposure or cold, but it's national news when the stock market drops a percentage point? This is prioritizing one life over another. Today, everything is framed as a competition, as the survival of the fittest, and as a result, a lot of people get left behind. Human beings are treated like consumer goods that are used and then discarded. St. John Paul II said, "Human persons are willed by God. They are imprinted with God's image. Their dignity does not come from the work they do, but from the persons they are." And this is the issue with modern politics. Maybe it's just modern American politics, but either infanticide is being glorified in the abortion industry, or we worship at the altar of the stock market and big business at the expense of the individual. And everybody is getting in on that. Even the current administration, they've pumped more than 40% of the entire stock market into artificial intelligence, which never seems like a good idea to put all your eggs in one basket, but that's what they've done. And we'll be talking more about AI in the future, but AI is destructive to the human person, to creativity, to true learning, to the environment, to the economy. The basis for all that the church believes about economic life is its vision of the worth and the sacredness of human beings, not about making our 401k go up. The dignity of the human person is what we measure against all other aspects of the economy and economic life. And as a result, the institutions that make up the economy ought to be there to serve human beings and not the other way around. The American mystic Thomas Merton, he was a monk from Tennessee, and he said that if we could see each other as we truly are, as human beings, nothing would ever get done, because we would constantly be in awe. We would be too busy bowing down to each other for the reverence and beauty of who we are. Human personhood must be respected with that same reverence that is a religious reverence. When we deal with each other, we should do so with the same sense of awe that arises in the presence of something that is holy and sacred, because that's what we are, holy and sacred. Catechism states, "There exist also sinful inequalities that affect millions of men and women, and these are in open contradiction of the gospel." It says that inequalities are sinful. They are contradictory to the gospel. The Second Vatican Council says, "Whatever insults human dignity, such as subhuman living conditions, arbitrary imprisonment, deportation, slavery, prostitution, the selling of women and children, disgraceful working conditions, where men are treated as mere tools for profit rather than as a free, responsible person. All of these things poison human society. They do more harm to those who practice them than to those who suffer from the injury. That's an interesting last line. They do more harm, these injustices do more harm to those who practice them than to those who suffer from it. In other words, the more we allow these things to happen, the more it affects us and the way that we see others and the way that we treat others. I think the reason why bullying is on the rise in our schools is because it's how the marginalized are treated outside of our schools. After the initial shock has worn off, we sort of shrug our shoulders at every new war. Who's really talking about the war in Ukraine or the war in Israel or the war in Iran, unless it's about oil prices? When you think about that, this is industrialized death, but we only talk about it because we have to pay more for gas. Right now I'm reading a book that's about the first month of the First World War called The Guns of August by Barbara Tuchman. And not to get too into the weeds on it, but if you're familiar, in the First World War, Germany, in order to attack France, they went through Belgium, which was a neutral country, so that they could avoid some mountains and some fortresses. And so they swept through this neutral country expecting to be completely, unopposed. And when they met with the resistance in Belgium, they were pretty angry. And this is how they reacted. The method was to assemble the inhabitants in the main square, women usually on one side and men on the other. Select every 10th man or every second man, or all on one side, according to the whim of the individual officer. March them to a nearby field or empty lot behind the railroad station and shoot them. In Belgium, there were many towns whose cemeteries today have rows and rows of memorial stones inscribed with a name, a date, 1914, and a legend repeated over and over, shot by the Germans. We read in general about the number of casualties of war, 60 million in World War II, 20 million in World War I, 3 million in Vietnam, 3 million in Korea. But when it's presented on a local level, like 1 out of every 10 of your neighbors shot at random, for some reason it left a different impression on me. It made me feel sick. A life ended in an instant for no reason. A life that had no meaning to the person pulling the trigger or the person ordering the fire. A life that if we truly knew what and who we were encountering, we would be bowing down to them out of reverence. Our gospel today, Jesus says, I give praise to you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, for although you have hidden these things from the wise and learned, you have revealed them to little ones. God reveals himself to the little ones, to the marginalized. In 16 years of being a priest, if I've learned one thing, it is that the second we think we have it figured out, we should turn to the poor to actually learn what life means. The little and the marginalized have a lot to teach us. On the occasion of our nation's 250th year anniversary, I'll lighten the mood a little bit, we can all reflect on what it means to be a citizen of this country. Less patriotic and more pessimistic people will say that this country was built on racism and slavery. But I say that the ability to overcome these things is the heart of what it means to be an American. Our opening hymn was my favorite patriotic hymn, America the Beautiful, and my favorite line from my favorite patriotic hymn is, America, America, God mend thine every flaw. That God can heal. Our nation's history is a history of overcoming hatred, and that's what makes America beautiful. There was a French writer in the 1800s named Alexis de Tocqueville, and this is sort of an apocryphal story. It's never been proven that he wrote this, but it's just sort of part of the American legend. He came to the United States with one goal, to discover the secret of her greatness and her genius. And after traveling the country, he came to a conclusion, and he is said to have written this. I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her commodious harbors and her ample rivers, and it was not there. I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her fertile fields and boundless forests, and it was not there. I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her rich mines and her vast world commerce, and it was not there. I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her school system and her institutions of learning, and it was not there. I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her democratic Congress and her matchless Constitution, and it was not there. Not until I went into the churches of America did I understand the secret of her genius and power. America is great because America is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great.